Welcome to the Bad Boys 3.0 on the Disgruntled Losers Podcast Network, where we're going to stray away from the Pistons this episode, and we're going to talk about all the rumors surrounding the big names potentially moving in the NBA. And with that being said, there's really only one place you can start when you talk about big names moving in the NBA, and that's the fact that we have a code red in Boston. The train has left the station, the toothpaste is out of the tube, Brad got caught with his pants down.
Oh my God.
In the back of the limo with the Greek goddess.
God.
And to make it worse, this isn't Wolf of Wall Street. Margot doesn't stay, not even for a little bit. Giannis wiped the coke off his chest. He got out of the limo. He called up Bobby and said, "Meet me in Miami. This is over. This ain't fun here in Boston." Now Jaylen's not actually going to drag Brad Stevens out of the limo and beat him with a handbag, but it's over. All jokes aside, it is over for Jaylen Brown in Boston. The Celtics had a legitimate offer to Milwaukee where they offered Jaylen Brown plus picks for Giannis. Now, I remember the last time I got on here, I said I wasn't sure who got the picks in a potential Jaylen Brown for Giannis Antetokounmpo deal. And it looked like Boston was the one that was going to give the picks along with Jaylen Brown. And that's not surprising in the fact that Milwaukee had all the power when the rumors got out that Boston was floating Jaylen Brown in these conversations legitimately. Because once Boston did that, as I'm joking about now, the toothpaste is out the tube. Jaylen Brown hears his name out there. He knows that you offered him for Giannis. You can't not execute that trade at that point. And if you looked at some of the gambling sites that allowed you to bet on, prediction markets or whatever it is, Boston had, a darn near 70% chance to land Giannis in a lot of those, gambling places. And they didn't do it. And that's why I say it makes sense that it ended up being Jaylen plus picks for Giannis, because I'm sure the first iteration of the trade was, all right, we will do this. We will offer you Jaylen Brown for Giannis. And Milwaukee's like, yeah, maybe. How about a couple picks? And then at that same time, they had one of the reporters go out there and make sure the whole world knew that Boston sent them an offer. And so then, it got to the point where, they were going to get a couple picks out of Boston. And then there was the Marcus Spears report that said Jaylen Brown had no interest in going to Milwaukee. And, when that report came out, I kind of laughed. I was like, well, no, duh. But I shouldn't have laughed, because that report had actual value to it, because it told Milwaukee that we can't trade for Jaylen Brown. And Milwaukee, to this point, they made the trade with Miami, and so they have Tyler Hero. They have indicated to the rest of the NBA that they're not looking to bottom out. With the new rules with tanking in the NBA, there is no benefit for a team bottoming out. And even more so with Milwaukee, because they don't even own their first-round pick next year. So there is zero motivation for Milwaukee to bottom out. And so, we're not going to talk about Tyler Hero today, but, I don't expect Tyler Hero to get moved. When the report comes out from Jake Fisher or Stein, whoever that was, that, Milwaukee's still fielding offers for Tyler Hero. So duh. Cute. The only thing that means is that Milwaukee front office is still doing their jobs. They're actually sitting in front of their computers. Their phones are actually on, and if you call them, they will answer. That's all that report meant. That doesn't mean that they're actually shopping Tyler Hero for the best offer. They have no motivation to shop Tyler Hero for the best offer, because they have no motivation to be really bad with the new tanking rules and with them not owning their own pick. And so, all right, putting Milwaukee aside, like I said, Jaylen Brown, there is a very, 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 very small chance that he goes back to Boston. At this point, it seems like Boston has to trade him. Now, thankfully for Boston, Jaylen Brown's not going to go full on Brandon Ayuk. He is very active on social media, and there were some things that Jaylen Brown was on X, and he had a little back and forth with Bobby Marks at ESPN, and really all that was Bobby Marks got on ESPN and said one of the stupidest things that I've ever seen somebody say on an actual national on an actual show. That this guy's getting paid a good amount of money to get on TV and have opinions, and this was one of the worst things I've ever seen said on TV. He said that he was talking to somebody who works for a team that said if they traded for Jaylen Brown that he would be probably the 7th best player on their team. Now, you don't even have to go through all of the rosters in the NBA to understand that that is like an absolute ridiculous statement. And for Bobby Marks to just take a comment that clearly somebody was drunk at a bar and just told him, and he thought, heck, you know a good place for that opinion would be? ESPN. Let's do that. And so he goes on and he says that, and then Jaylen Brown, like, duh, like that was the straw that broke the camel's back. He said, this is dumb. I'm one of the best two-way players in the NBA. Roll the ball out and let's go. And that was essentially what he said. There was a little bit more of a back and forth, but it had nothing to do with his trade rumors or how he feels about being in Boston. It was just the fact that he was defending his name and the fact that people are really trying to drag Jaylen Brown's trade value down because there's only one team in the entire NBA that would like his trade value to be high, and that's the Boston Celtics. And so anybody else that talks about Jaylen Brown is going to try to do anything they can to lower his trade value so they can acquire him at a lower cost. And so, not that Bobby Marks is angling for any of these teams, but that comment aside, the rest of them that Jaylen's probably hearing, across the internet are coming from people that benefit from his trade value going down. I'm rambling too much. All that being said, I did canvass the league. I looked at all the rumors out there. I went through the trade machine. I have a top 5 plus a couple honorable mention Jaylen Brown fake trades. And like I said, I didn't just go off of these trades in a vacuum. I'm sorry, Pistons fans. There's not going to be any Pistons trades in here. I've done it over and over and over again, and the only trade that Boston wouldn't hang up the phone immediately is if you called them and you had to offer them a Sir Thompson and Jalen Duren for Jaylen Brown, and that's a ridiculous trade from the Pistons side of things, and so that's never going to happen. The trade rumors out there that had Jalen Duren for Jaylen Brown, I just don't see it at all. From Boston's perspective. From Detroit's perspective, hell yeah, let's do that trade. From Boston, that doesn't make any sense. It takes away one of their elite assets, and I don't think they're looking to swap him for a center. Now, I know a lot of teams in the NBA do need a center, and I'm not saying Duren doesn't carry any value, but he doesn't carry the value of you can trade him 1-for-1 for an all-NBA wing. We're not quite there yet. There is a big that I have on this list that maybe you can trade 1-for-1 for an all-NBA wing, but it is not Jalen Duren. And so I digress. Pistons fans, I'm sorry you're not on this list. Let's get to the list. All right, the 2 honorable mention trades I have are Orlando could offer Franz Wagner and Anthony Black for Jaylen Brown. I haven't seen any rumors. It would make sense from Orlando's side, if Boston had to do it, if Jaylen was like, trade me now, and none of these, 6 trades in front of this one I have came to fruition. I guess they could accept that trade. It's not my favorite, like I said, but it's something to think about, I guess. Indiana Pacers, I just have been really, really hard on the Pacers front office for that trade that they made for the number 5 pick for Ivica Zubac. Rightfully so. The entire NBA has been hard on them for that. But when you make a trade like that, essentially the clock has started for the front office in Indiana. You know what I mean? They have to win, and they have to win now when you start trading future picks. And that trade went sideways on them early. And so now what is the Pacers play? Well, I mean, you could offer Siakam and Nembhard for Jaylen Brown. From Boston, I think that might be a hang-up, and maybe I have these backwards, and maybe the Franz Anthony Black one is actually better than the Siakam Nembhard one. But either way, they're both honorable mentions for a reason. I don't think it's enough for Boston. Even if you added picks to both of these, I just don't know if Boston even thinks about these. It's probably a quick hang-up, but I think it would be worth Indiana and Orlando both making that phone call, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had. All right, number 5, the New Orleans Pelicans. I've said this trade over and over and over. If you've texted me, if you've listened to any of the shows so far, Trey Murphy and DeJounte Murray for Jaylen Brown makes a little sense. It makes sense for New Orleans. If Boston has to trade Jaylen Brown, getting an asset like Trey Murphy, and then the potential of DeJounte Murray. I know he's coming off a major injury, but if you could get him to 85-90% of what he's been in the past, and if he's your fifth best player in the starting lineup, you kind of got something in the East. If gosh, I'm going to just give DeJounte a little bit of health, but if you went Murray, White, Trey Murphy, Jason Tatum, and Kata, Boston might look at that and think that's something. That's bringing Pritchard back off the bench, and they actually have a couple young guys. Boston has a bench right now. The bench is not the issue for Boston. They need to do something with this Jaylen Brown piece, and the return has to be a borderline all-star player. So all of these trades that I have here in the top 5 essentially are borderline all-star player, another player that would make a difference for Boston this year, and you're probably going to have to add some picks to it. So even Trey Murphy and DeJounte Murray is probably going to take picks from New Orleans side to Boston to get that deal done. And so, like I said, it makes sense for both sides a little bit, probably New Orleans more than Boston, but something to think about. Number 4. I haven't heard this one at all, and it's the Denver Nuggets. I guess I don't understand why you're not seeing more rumors about Denver getting involved here. I know they're down a couple picks, and Denver is probably more focused on re-signing Peyton Watson, and to do that, they need to trade either Christian Braun, or you're seeing right now there's actually a lot of Aaron Gordon rumors out there right now, and I'm not going to talk about Aaron Gordon today. He's not quite the A-list celebrity that I have on the list of names we're going to talk about today, but he's available. Aaron Gordon's available. Like I said, Christian Braun's available. The Nuggets have to make a move to re-sign Peyton Watson and keep their financial stability. And the obvious one is they're trying to trade Christian Braun, and it'll probably be a little bit of a salary dump for that. But all that being said, what if Denver offered Jamal Murray and Cam Johnson for Jaylen Brown? Now, Boston fans probably just threw up in their mouths a little bit. I don't think they want Jamal Murray, and Cam Johnson had a really, really bad year last year with Denver, in a spot that I think people thought Cam Johnson was really going to excel playing next to Jokic. And it just didn't happen for one reason or another, injuries. He just didn't quite click with the system, but Cam's still a pretty good player. And Jamal Murray is an all-star. I don't think he's ever made NBA, but a champion in his own right. They won. If Boston is forced to trade Jaylen Brown, Jamal Murray, Cam Johnson, plus this one's going to take a lot of picks. This one, I don't know exactly what Denver's pick chest is like right now, but it's probably going to take most of them to get that deal done. But maybe I could see something there. All right, number 3. Another one that I haven't seen enough rumors about is the Utah Jazz. The obvious connection would be the GM of the Jazz, Danny Ainge, was the GM of the Celtics when Jaylen Brown was drafted and as he was coming up. And so there's a connection there. I have no idea if there's a relationship or if it's good. But that's a connection that people are going to make. And so you have the trade of Lauri Markkanen and Ace Bailey for Jaylen Brown. Now, salaries work. This one, I think once we get to this trade, we're starting to get closer to, okay, Boston would think about this trade. Jaylen Brown's production, Lauri Markkanen's production, it's not a one-for-one, but you're trading skill sets that Boston actually might value. There has always been a little bit of skill overlap between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and you bring Lauri Markkanen into the mix, and there's not really that overlap. Like Markkanen's, I know they play him at the 3 in Utah, and they're going to tell themselves that he's a 3 out in Utah this year, but he's a 4. Like Markkanen is a clear 4, and he could be a 4 on a championship team. If he's like your third best player, you got something with Markkanen. And I know he's probably going to be their second best player in Boston, but it's something to think about. And Ace Bailey, it's wild. He had an okay rookie year. He was second team all rookie. But from the beginning, it felt like a clunky fit with Ace Bailey in Utah. He made it open that he didn't want to go there, and they drafted him anyway. There was no issues that came out last year. There was no, reports that he was causing any type of issue, any type of problems. But at the same time, when the relationship starts that way, it would make sense if there was an early divorce. And so, like I said, Lauri Markkanen, Ace Bailey for Jaylen Brown. Who says no? Probably need some picks from Utah going to Boston, I would think, but we're kind of getting closer to not needing picks to balance the trade once you start talking Markkanen. Number 2, the San Antonio Spurs. And now, this is one of those ones where they got Victor on a rookie contract. It's having the QB on the rookie contract. It's probably a good idea to make a big move when you have that. And they also have the De'Aaron Fox contract. And so the trade would be De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell for Jaylen Brown. Again, who says no to this? Obviously, Spurs fans, they want Fox out. But Spurs fans like Vassell. Vassell's a big part of that team and a big part of what they did this past year. And if you watch him in the playoffs, he's a playoff performer. And so Boston... you still have Derek White, and so Fox, Derek White, and Vassell, that's small. I'm not sure if you can necessarily play all three of them together. This one might be Boston says no, and you gotta take the temperature of Boston and how they feel about Fox. As a Pistons fan, I said I wasn't gonna talk about the Pistons, but I haven't totally wrote off the idea of Fox coming to Detroit if the deal was right. If Fox truly does want out of San Antonio, which there was some rumblings as the playoffs were progressing, and then also you saw Fox's performance down the stretch, wasn't good for San Antonio, and so you could see where both sides would be like, San Antonio would like to take that contract. Fox makes almost $40 million, and if you took that $40 million and you flipped it for a better player, a la Jaylen Brown, that would make a lot of sense for San Antonio. Boston might be the one that says no. If I'm Boston, I'm probably, if San Antonio calls, Carter Bryant is probably the name that Boston fans are probably screaming has to be in this trade. And he might be untouchable for San Antonio, which is crazy to say because, you got to look at San Antonio and say, all right, how many untouchable players do you have? Like, obviously, Wemby's untouchable. Obviously, Harper's untouchable. Obviously, Castle's untouchable. Like, you're going to tell me Carter Bryant's untouchable too? Well, then now I just can't make a trade with you. But at the same time, they still have Keldon Johnson. They still have Vassell. They still have Fox. San Antonio seems primed to make one of these 2-for-1 trades where they're trading two of their good guys and getting an all-star back. And like I said, I'm just surprised that, the money works. I'm surprised this one's not being talked about more. And maybe it's just the fact that I'm overvaluing De'Aaron Fox still. But I still think he's a good NBA player. All right. The number one trade that I do think makes sense for both sides is with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And it's a 1-for-1. All these other ones were 2-for-1s. And it's Evan Mobley for Jaylen Brown. Now, from the Cavs side of things, it's getting a little stale in Cleveland. And I don't mean that in the fact that they have to make a move, but this is a good opportunity to make a move. I would not suggest them to float Evan Mobley's name around just on the trade block and see what you can get for him. Like that's not what I'm suggesting. But if a name like Jaylen Brown comes up, or, we're going to talk in a second, if a name like Ant Edwards comes up, then we can talk Evan Mobley being involved in a trade. And so from Cleveland's perspective, that would give you James Harden, Donovan Mitchell, Jaylen Brown. You still have Jared Allen at center. They got a couple pieces that can slide in there to fill out that starting lineup. Maybe they make they probably have some type of mid-level exception available to them. Maybe they can go out there and find someone to slide in and play the 4 for them in this scenario. But then from Boston's side of things, you're getting younger. This is the only trade I have that's taking Jaylen Brown and just making him younger. You know what I mean? There's all the other trades are 2-for-1s where pretty much the same age. It's just kind of keeping you where you're at right now. This, I don't want to say it resets the clock, but it really does a tick, give your window a little bit bigger, a little bit longer of a runway, is how I would say it. This trade has had some rumors about it. You've heard some reporters report that these conversations have been had from both sides. Now, it could be just Boston is going to take its time on this Jaylen Brown trade. They want to see all the options they have available to them. And, maybe they're trying to get like a Sam Merrill out of the deal too. Boston's probably just trying to make sure, just like Milwaukee did when they traded Giannis, I think Boston's just trying to make sure they get everything they can out of Jaylen Brown. And, just looking at that Giannis deal that just got done, I think most people would say Milwaukee didn't get enough, partially because they felt like they needed to make a trade that kept them relevant, but also because they probably waited a year too long too. And so this would be the point where, as I've been rambling, Boston has to trade Jaylen Brown. And one of the immediate things that happened the minute Giannis got traded, now to change tracks a little bit, was it was reported by Tim McMahon, it was reported by Brian Windhorst, piggybacked off that report, that the minute Giannis got traded, pretty much all the executives in the NBA that were looking at Giannis, they turned their, they were focusing on Giannis, and they're turning their approach to Anthony Edwards now. It was reported that it wasn't reported that Minnesota was worried that Anthony Edwards was going to ask out. It wasn't reported that Minnesota wanted to trade Anthony Edwards. It was just reported that pretty much the NBA as a majority felt that it was in their best interest to start getting their Edwards trade offers in order. And that in the next year or so, that there was a good chance that Edwards was going to become available. And this was going to be the next big superstar to become available. And he's younger than Giannis is right now. And this would be, if Ant was truly to become available, it's probably the biggest name to become available since LeBron James. And I'm not saying that to try to oversell this a little bit, but Ant Edwards has carried that Minnesota Timberwolves team deep into the playoffs on multiple occasions. He has already made 2 Western Conference Finals and made the second round the other time. He has, I mean that gives him 5 playoff series wins on his resume already. There is not a lot. I mean, you're talking, we're in Detroit. You're looking at Cade. Cade's got 1. Cade's years away from catching up to Ant having 5 playoff series wins. It would make sense for Ant to have looked at the situation, and this is before the trade that we're going to talk about next, that it was getting a little stale in Minnesota. The Rudy Gobert trade worked, didn't work, kind of worked. The Julius Randle trade, he was good in Minnesota, didn't put him over the top. Dante DiVincenzo's hurt. That really stunk. The Ayo DeSumo move, now that's one that's going to kind of bring value back to your organization, and that's one that they hit a home run on that one, and that, we're never going to talk about the Bulls on this podcast until they get their crap together, because they just gave guys away for free for absolutely no reason, and Ayo was one of them. I never did not understand that move when it happened, and I still don't understand it now, but he's on the he's on the Timberwolves, and he's going to be on the Timberwolves, because let's talk Minnesota as a whole now. First move they make was salary dumping Julius Randle to the Nets. And when that trade happened, that's one of those where everybody loves the Brian Windhorst meme, like, what does that mean? It clearly meant that they were going to make a trade. What that trade was at the time, we didn't know. But now, as of today, we do know, because Minnesota traded for LaMelo Ball. Not to bury the lead, this is probably the second biggest trade. This is definitely the second biggest trade that's happened during the summer here. And the trade is Minnesota sent Naz Reid, a 2033 unprotected first, good asset, 3 first-round pick swaps, which, a lot of details in those, but pick swaps are a lot more valuable now than they were 2 years ago with the way the lottery system works. So that's real assets, these pick swaps. And then 3 second-round picks, which is what it is with the second-round picks. Let's talk LaMelo Ball. Now, I have been on this podcast multiple times quoted saying I do not believe LaMelo Ball is a winning player. And the evidence is in the play-in games. It's in any chance they have in a do-or-die scenario. LeMelo Ball makes unprofessional decisions at the wrong times. I don't believe he's a serious pro. And I don't want to knock the guy. He seems nice, and I actually like the Ball family as a whole. I know a lot of people just turn their nose up to his dad, and most people like Lonzo at this point, I think. But I've watched enough LaMelo where I don't get it. And there's no locker room issues with him. Likable, a really good passer, and so I guess I could see where guys would think, he's going to make offense easier for them. Maybe Ant Edwards thinks, he's going to take a lot of the playmaking, burden off of him, and there's a flat-out second all-star playmaker next to Ant Edwards now, where, you can stagger them, and you always have one of those guys on the court at all times, and you got Io with them too, and can you play all three of them together? Maybe, I don't know. But all that being said, I think all this did was speed up the fact that Ant Edwards is going to be available next summer. I don't think this did anything but make it blatantly obvious that if this doesn't go well this year, they have to trade Ant Edwards next summer. There was a chance that it wasn't that drastic before they made the trade, but now that they made the trade, it's all or nothing essentially this year. If LaMelo can't prove to the Minnesota front office or to Ant himself that he's going to take this team from where they were to that next level, then it's over for Ant. Ant's going to walk. And I'm not saying he's going to walk as a free agent, but he's going to walk into Minnesota's front office and say, trade me. And it's probably going to be to Atlanta. You know what I mean? Atlanta. I was looking at you for some of these trades, for some of these big names, and I just can't get there with anybody right now, with your biggest assets being Kuminga, Kispert, and Ricochet. I mean, that's not cutting it for any of these names. So Atlanta, get your assets together, because pretty sure Ant wants to go there. Minnesota, you better hope it goes well this year with LaMelo, because if it doesn't, and the last piece of this, and it was one of the biggest pieces of evidence that Windhorst and McMahon brought to the table when they were talking about Ant Edwards possibly being available, was that the general manager for the Minnesota Timberwolves, Tim Connelly, is a very well-respected general manager. He is on the last year of his contract. And to everybody's knowledge that's close to the situation, Minnesota wants to bring him back. They have I shouldn't say they've offered him, but there's a good chance that they have offered him a lucrative contract to come back and be the general manager of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Tim Connelly has not accepted any of these or any of these, contracts, and is not currently negotiating with them. He is looking like he's going to walk away from a general managing position in the NBA, which does not happen very often. The only reason it happens is, one, if you have another job already lined up, or two, you see something bad on the horizon, and that something is probably, he knows in his gut that there's a good chance Ant Edwards wants out. And what's the point of sticking around being the general manager of a team that doesn't have any assets, and then he has to be the guy to trade Ant Edwards? If I'm him, that is a good time to leave. Bring another GM in that can start his career by trading Ant Edwards, and he can kickstart his tenure as the GM with whatever assets he gets back in that Ant trade. There's a lot of evidence pointing towards Ant Edwards being available, and I'm not sure this LaMelo Ball trade did anything to hinder that. All right, moving on. We got to talk Kawhi Leonard. I would say of all the names that are out there right now, Kawhi is probably the one that, number one, might get moved the fastest, but number two, there's just more recent rumors about. So why is Kawhi Leonard available? Well, the number one thing is the Clippers made the Ivica Zubac trade with the Indiana Pacers, and they got the number 5 pick in this year's draft, and they just drafted Wagler from Illinois. And so they have somebody to build around. And they also traded James Harden for Darius Garland. And so you have a backcourt of Darius Garland and Wagler now where, that might be something, and that's at least something where the Clippers can look at and say, let's try this. This is absolutely worth trying. And so that doesn't mean you have to trade Kawhi Leonard. I just named 2 guards and Kawhi plays the 3-4. They could easily play together. Here's the thing. Kawhi might make the Clippers too good. They finally have their picks back under their belt, where I think they've finally paid the piper on the Paul George trade to SGA. And I think if you want to Google the final trade results, once all the picks conveyed, that trade is, I don't know if that one's worse than the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum trade, but it's up there. Those are the 2 you look back at. Like, those 2 stand alone as the worst 2 trades in NBA history, in my opinion, at least in recent NBA history. Just total transformation of the franchises that received those 2 packages, being the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Boston Celtics. And look what happened. They both won championships before the teams that traded those picks away, which is funny, in the Clippers and the Nets, which is just so funny to think about. Either way, the Clippers might be too good next year with Kawhi Leonard. Now, there is a tricky science to getting a top pick in the NBA now, where you can't bottom out. So the top 3 or 4 teams, I don't have it in front of me, but if you're one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the NBA, you no longer have the best odds at the number 1 pick. You essentially want to be the 4th worst team through the next worst team that doesn't make the playoffs. So whatever that is, 4 through 15, essentially. Is where you want to land to get yourself the best odds to get the number 1 pick. It's probably like 4 through 8, I actually think has the best odds. And so what needs to happen is you need to be not a bottom feeder, but not make the playoffs. Kawhi plus Darius Garland, I'm not going to say a rookie's going to drive winning, but Kawhi dragged them to more wins than they deserved last year. Kawhi was second team All-NBA last year. Kawhi played 65 games last year. I know that's crazy to think about, but Kawhi played 65 games. And that's the other reason why it would make sense for the Clippers to trade Kawhi right now, is because you're trading when his value's high. Like, this is never going to happen again. Kawhi's been hurt his entire career. You finally have one season to point at that says, look he can do this. He can play, actually, guys. And like, when he plays, he had his best scoring season in his career last year. And that's not a hyperbole. That's not me like trying to exaggerate. That is factual. He was his best version of his offensive self in 2025, Kawhi Leonard. And that is crazy. At 34 years old, or whatever he is, 35 years old last year, with all his injuries, at this point, he was still that guy. And so I don't know if the Clippers are going to get a real offer for him. And, I keep saying I'm not going to talk about the Pistons, but I think the Pistons barked up the tree. Because there was a report, Jake Fisher came out with a report that said Kawhi would not re-sign with Detroit or Miami if he was traded there. And so it sounds like you wouldn't get a report like that if Detroit or Miami didn't make phone calls to LA, and LA didn't, start to negotiate with those teams, and it got back to Kawhi, and it was like, well, Kawhi says, hold on, no. No sense in talking any further. I'm not going to Detroit. I'm not going to Miami. Now, randomly enough, in that same report, the 2 teams that were reported by Jake Fisher that Kawhi said he would re-sign if he went back to, one, or that he would, if he was traded to, one was if he went back to San Antonio, which I thought that was just crazy when I heard that. There's a little bit of Munchausen syndrome, or God, I just butchered that. What's the one where you're captive and then you fall in love with your captor? He requested a trade out of San Antonio, however many years ago it was, and it was a very ugly exit. For the fact that there was a report that came out that Kawhi said he would re-sign with the Spurs if he went back, that's hilarious. I'm sure it's Victor Wembanyama driven, but just was really, really funny, I thought. There are 2 teams that are currently being rumored to be interested in Kawhi Leonard. Number 1 is the Toronto Raptors, and, makes sense for a variety of reasons. One, Toronto is at that point in their franchise again where it's just gotten stale. This really reminds me of, it's not as good as it was when they had Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. but it's similar in the fact that I shouldn't compare these two eras at all. They actually won games with DeRozan and with Lowry. They're not winning games right now with Ingram and with Barnes and with Barrett and with Quickly, but it's similar in the fact that you have these contracts that you can trade. And these guys still carry some value. I'm not sure how much value Ingram's carrying these days, but Barrett still carries value. They're not going to trade Scotty Barnes. Emmanuel Quickly still has some value, even though he's making $30 million a year now. It makes sense that Toronto would want to get involved in this. And, of course, Kawhi Leonard was the Finals MVP on their only championship in franchise history. So, obviously, another reason to bring the guy back that, you could maybe Kawhi retires a Raptor and you can build him a statue. And this is like a thing now. And you can just put the whole Vince Carter thing aside and pretend like he didn't leave in controversy. And this is our guy now. Sorry, Vince. This is our guy. So the trade would be, not to bury it, is Brandon Ingram, Jakob Poeltl for Kawhi Leonard, and then how many picks it takes to make that happen. Why would the Clippers do this? Brandon Ingram is still a player in the NBA. On a good team, is he a starter? Maybe. Is he a really good sixth man? Heck yeah, he is, but mentally he's not a sixth man. Mentally, he's one of your best players in his mind, and so I'm not sure how well he's going to do knowing that he's going to a situation where, they're trying to develop a young guard and a young, they already have Garland, who I wouldn't call a young point guard, but they're trying to develop Wagler, who's a young guard, and he's going in there and maybe he gets the ball and maybe he can just score and just kind of do the Tyler Hero thing and kind of just do the Michael Porter Jr. thing where, you just get to score on a bad team. And his contract will, run out eventually. They could trade him when he's expiring, and the Clippers could just get value for Leonard that way. And maybe they can turn Ingram around. Maybe that becomes an actual asset for them. Maybe he is the third fiddle to the two other guys I just named, and maybe that's a team. I doubt it, but just something to think about. It's being rumored. That was the trade that made the most sense to me. The one report that came out of this rumor was that the that the Raptors did not want to trade RJ Barrett in the trade. So, that would make sense for the Clippers to want RJ Barrett, even though there's probably some positional overlap with Wagler after you just drafted him. So maybe you don't want him. But it looked like if it is a Kawhi Leonard to the Raptors trade, it's going to be a Brandon Ingram-based trade. Now, the other team that's getting a lot of buzz is Dallas. Now, I guess Dallas must think that a Kyrie Irving, Kawhi, Cooper Flag trio is interesting, and it is interesting. I mean, I'm not sure if it's interesting in the West. If that was in the East, it would be very, very, very interesting. And the trade I just, quickly put together was P.J. Washington, Klay Thompson, Caleb Martin for Kawhi Leonard. That's 3 expiring contracts. They're probably going to have to add some picks to that. And I'm sure the Clippers are sitting here like, I want to trade Kawhi for something like really valuable. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I think if that was a real possibility, it would have already happened by now. I would expect the Clippers to receive expiring contracts with picks, or in the case of Brandon Ingram, maybe you can revitalize him a little bit and trade him again in the future for even a larger pool of assets. But there's not going to be any quality young players or any big names going back to the Clippers in a Kawhi Leonard trade. It doesn't make any sense. LeBron James. I can't believe I'm doing a show and LeBron's the 5th name I'm going to mention. I guess, he's the 5th name we're going to talk about today. Part of the reason is he's going to stay in LA. It doesn't make sense for LeBron to sign anywhere but Los Angeles. Well, number one, he's not going to sign, quote unquote, sign anywhere but Los Angeles. There's nobody in the league that has more than a mid-level exception to give the Lakers to give LeBron. And that's like $15 million a year. And there's one thing we know about LeBron is that he would like to be paid for his services. He still is a quality player and would like to be paid as such. when when he had his meeting with the Lakers, it might not, he probably wasn't there. When Rich Paul had his meeting with Rob Pelinka, for LeBron James for their exit meeting, Rich Paul essentially said to Pelinka, we might take less money from you, but we would like to see the names that you plan on getting in order for us to take less money. We are not going to just blindly sign a contract and trust you with the extra money to go out and spend it. If you sat there and told Rich Paul, we are going to go out and get, whatever name it may be, and then we want to bring LeBron back at this number instead of this number, and we can do that if LeBron signs at this number instead of that number, then Rich Paul and LeBron, might have thought about it. But that player doesn't exist right now on the market. It makes most sense for the Lakers and for LeBron to come to some sort of agreement. From the Lakers side, they still need his services. They need everything he brought. He was an awesome third fiddle when it mattered to Doncic and to Reeves. Let's just run that back. The Lakers don't have a lot of options as it stands to improve their roster. I know, you read a lot of things about, Lakers fans thinking that they're going to go get this star and they're going to go get that star. It's not happening. The Lakers don't have the asset pool to make any big splash trades like that. Honestly, the only splash move the Lakers would have is if they somehow did a sign and trade with LeBron. And so that's what I had here, and that's what I wanted to say, is that the only two ways LeBron doesn't play for the Lakers is if, like I just said, if he takes a mid-level exception someplace else, or even, I guess he could take the minimum, like he could make $3-4 million next year if he wants to. He could go to any team he wants. I don't think he's going to do that. He has never indicated along the way at all that he intends to do that. And the only other reason, the number two reason why LeBron wouldn't be a Laker next year is if the Lakers completed a sign and trade. And I guess if this saga drags on and on and on, I'll start to seriously consider this. But at this point, I haven't really considered a sign and trade for LeBron. There was Windhorse threw out there last week that, sure, the Lakers would love to do a sign and trade where they sent LeBron to Cleveland and they got Jared Allen. That's not going to happen. Cleveland is not sending Jared Allen to LA for LeBron James. Cleveland, I'm not sure. There's been no indication that Cleveland wants LeBron James. Like I said, if he's going to go there at the veteran minimum, then anybody would want LeBron James. But there's been no rumors, reports, anything out of Cleveland that they're pursuing a LeBron James reunion. If it happened, it happened, but it's not going to be something that they're going to pay value to make happen. If LeBron wants to, come there for free, then sure, but that's about it. And like I said, to put a pin in this LeBron thing, to me, the Lakers are probably just going to bring back their entire roster from last year. They've already signed Austin Reeves. I'm sure on the first day of free agency, you'll see Rui Hachimura, a contract at some type of mid-level exception. They got his early bird rights, so you'll probably see a 4 for $60 for Rui or something like that. I think LeBron, like I said, once free agency starts, you'll probably see LeBron James re-signing there too. It just makes sense for the Lakers to bring all those guys back. They just don't have any assets to make any moves, essentially. All right, the last name we're going to mention is Ja Morant. And I keep saying I'm not going to talk about the Pistons, but let's just talk about the Pistons right now, because the Pistons are kind of running out of names to turn to. And as far as A-list celebrity NBA players, Ja's probably the last one available that could theoretically actually play for the Pistons next year. Now, I say that Ja's not going to play for the Pistons next year. They just drafted a point guard who we are very, 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 very excited about. And now I have a whole Pistons off-season episode coming up here probably in the next 2 days. So look out for that. It's coming, and we're going to talk about Corey. We're going to talk a lot about him. We're going to talk Isaiah Joe. We're going to talk Duren. We're going to talk it all. We're going to talk everything Pistons. But you will hear some Pistons fans screaming, why not Ja? And essentially it's because, Ja's value has gotten to a point now where, like, you're talking about, trading expiring contracts and second-round picks for Ja. Like, you're not talking about trading actual value for him. And so, in a vacuum, does Ja fit on the Pistons? So, what were the Pistons missing last year? And how about we do it this way? Let's frame it this way. If Ja was on the Pistons last year, would the Pistons have beat the Cavs in the playoffs? Maybe. That, I think a lot of Pistons fans are sitting there thinking maybe on that one, because we were missing playmaking more than anything. I know a lot of Pistons fans, we need shooting, and we do need shooting, and Ja is not a shooter. Ja had 1 year where he was a shooter, and that was the year where, they made the conference finals, and it was looking up for Ja. It hasn't been that. He's got one outlier year. But, if you really, really dig into why the Pistons lost, it was less shooting and more playmaking. And Ja's an elite playmaker. And so if you just focused in on that fact, maybe Ja makes sense in Detroit. I don't see it. I don't see it happening. There's been zero rumors. I don't know Ja's mentality towards that coming in there. Clearly, he's not going to have the ball nearly as much at that point if K's the guy. But you're going to start to see just some wild rumors about Ja because there's no landing spot for him. All the teams like the Lakers and the Warriors and the Clippers and the Knicks and all these big markets with reporters that need to write 12 articles a week, they'll write the, could Ja come here and here's how Ja could fit on these teams. And, if Memphis is just going to give Ja away, well, heck, we'll take him. That's essentially what I'm doing right now for the Pistons. I don't see Memphis making that trade. I know it's out there that Memphis would like to totally reset around Boozer, which makes perfect sense. Boozer is the type of player you can reset around. He's probably going to come in and be very, very effective right away. We'll get into these guys that got drafted in a little bit on future episodes, but Boozer looks like he's going to come in and play well. And so if you wanted to just get the distraction of Ja out of there and just get all the focus on Boozer and Edey and whatever else they got left in that building, then maybe that makes a little sense. But I don't think, and I've said this before, Ja is not the locker room cancer that he's made out to be. And they still like him in Memphis. It's not like it's untathable or like they, it's not like they have to trade Ja. It actually, for me, where I sit, it makes way more sense for Memphis to try to bring him back up and try to revitalize him a little bit and see if we can get his trade value up just a little bit. One solid year of Ja playing with these young guys, I look at Kyrie Irving. I think Kyrie Irving's a great example of could Ja get his value to a level that Kyrie got it to before Dallas made the move for him. Or where it's at now, I guess I should say, where Dallas could trade Kyrie for real value that Memphis cannot trade Ja for right now. Dallas can get real value for Kyrie that Memphis can't get for Ja right now. And can that happen in the same way that it happened for Kyrie? That would be my prediction for Ja. So the last two were the last two on purpose because I think LeBron's staying in LA and I think Ja is staying in Memphis. But the other ones, Jaylen, you ain't staying in Boston, my friend. And Edwards, I think you got one more year in Minnesota. Kawhi, I think that's done in the next couple weeks. That's a lot of big names moving. There's been some big names moving in the NBA this offseason, and it's been fun, And the last thing I'll say is you're probably going to see less of these big trades going forward in the NBA. And the reason being is the lottery reform. Before, it made sense for teams like Milwaukee, for the Clippers, for Memphis, for other of these teams to completely bottom out. And it made sense for them to trade Kawhi, to trade Ja, to trade Tyler Hero, because winning games didn't make sense. Now it makes sense to keep these guys because you need to win games in order to get the best pick. It's not lose, get the best pick. It's lose, kind of win sometimes, and then get the best pick. And so you can't bottom out. there's no benefit in bottoming out anymore. And so, if it still benefited some of these teams to bottom out, and if Milwaukee owned their own first-round pick, they don't. So if that was the case, then yeah, you would see Tyler Hero being moved. You would see Julius Randle being moved. You would see all these guys being moved. But it doesn't make sense for them to. And so that's something the NBA's got to look at. I think we're going to get a lot more exciting on-court basketball down the stretch of the season, which is probably what the NBA wants. But at the same time, the NBA soap opera drama off-season is also a big part of the calendar that draws a lot of eyes to the league, and you're going to lose that with the lottery reform. I hope that they understood that when they made those rule changes. And you got the apron, the second apron, and how that limits you. That's also going to limit these trades going forward. And so they're just the NBA just keeps making little rule change after little rule change that makes it a lot harder to get these massive deals done. And so I just wanted to end on that. That was something to think about. So anyways, thanks for listening, everybody. I know I rambled a little bit this week, but we had a lot to get to. And I hope I get this out before any of these trades actually happen. But anyways, thanks for listening, everybody. Good night.